Hi guys, yet again it's a kind of farewell of sorts. This is the last video I'll shoot from the Aerostar, or my Aerostar. For those of you subscribed to my channel, it probably feels like this is pretty sudden, but it's not. I've actually had the Aerostar for 2 years. I'm moving on to another aircraft, and we don't have to go into what that is quite yet. I thought I'd make this a little tribute to the Aerostar, which has been a great aircraft. The Aerostar has always had a little bit of a reputation for being, you know, like a hot rod or a hot ship, hard to handle. But honestly, it's not. It's a really great plane. It flies great. It does exactly what it says it's supposed to do. And it's super sturdy and super fast and super economical. When you get too slow in the Aerostar, they can be kind of unforgiving. So that's part of the reputation they have. It also lands a little bit faster than perhaps other comparably sized twins. So this, added to the, the reputation of being such a hot ship, Aerostars come in two flavors, 601p and the 700 or the Superstar. The difference is the engine's horsepower. There's 290 horsepower on the 601p, which this is. And there's 350 horsepower aside on the 700 or the Superstars. Both are pressurized, both will fly to 25,000 feet, and with a modification, the 700 can even fly to 28,000 feet. The 601p is the one you want if you want economy. If you really want to go fast, the plane to get is the Superstar or the 700. Because it has such a thin wing, and because it has such a relatively narrow cross-section of the cabin, it has very little drag. And that is one of the reasons it's so fast. It used to be the fastest piston-powered twin in the world. With this 350 horsepower engines, we'll do almost 280 knots up high. It'll burn 50 gallons doing so, but that's speeds that will leave, a PC-12 turbine or early King Air, behind. So the 700 is a real speed demon. So if you don't care about fuel economy, you just want to go fast on a piston budget, the 700 is the one to get. But that speed also translates into good economy. This is a fast plane, but it really excels at economy. It'll do about 200 knots and 25 gallons in total, lean of peak. That's very economical for such a fast twin. She'll do about 230, 235 knots top speed at altitude. The Aerostars are also known for being built really, really strong. The main wing on these was stressed to over 10 G during certification before it broke. The tail plane, the elevator, is stressed to over 14 G before it broke. That thin wing doesn't necessarily make you think that, but the outer skin on the Aerostar fuselage and the wings is like 3 times as thick as most other airplanes. You'll never see any oil canning. Well, there's actually never been, as far as I know, an in-flight breakup of an Aerostar, So that gives you the extra level of confidence when you're riding in bad weather or turbulence, or even if you happen to be in a thunderstorm, there's that extra margin. And one of the ways you can tell that it's built really strong is the airspeed indicator. And you can see here that the VNE is just above 240 knots indicated. But you look at that yellow arc there, it's very, very narrow. So, you can keep the speeds up on these. You don't have to throttle back. And one of the ways that's really useful is, let's say you're at altitude and ATC gives you, descend to whatever, All I do is just push the nose over. I never reduce throttle or anything. I just take the speed. Because it doesn't matter here. You can go all the way up to, to redline. While screaming down at 260 knots ground speed, you just take the speed, they're great that way, and I never have to worry about, structurally that they won't be up to the task, The Aerostar is always up to the task. Another joy of, flying the Aerostar is it's all push-pull rods. Handling-wise, it's just the best plane. Very, very direct. You feel everything, and it feels like a little fighter jet. It almost feels like, not that I've flown aerobatics, but it feels to me like that's what an aerobatic aircraft would feel like. That kind of direct, intuitive feel. And that's exactly how the Aerostar flies, and it's great. You know, I've never flown an aircraft that flies as well as this aircraft. Another great thing with that kind of narrow, thin wing is that it's because it has a pretty high wing loading. It rides very nicely in turbulence. Normally when people complain about turbulence, you don't really feel it that much in an Aerostar because it's just a loaded wing. You know, we talked about the speeds earlier, that you have to keep the speeds up, and this is a plane you have to fly by the numbers. This is very true, but it's also a very, very honest wing, and I'll tell you exactly how honest it is because it was certified. The FAA certified this plane without a stall warner because this wing will buffet enormously when it gets close to stall. It gives you about almost a 10 knot before it actually breaks. It'll give you warnings, you know, very strong warning. You can immediately tell when you're entering like the danger zone, so to speak. So the FAA didn't see the need for it to have a stall warner because it just gave such, you know, it was like phoning it in, you know. So that's another thing that's really good about the aircraft. It's safe in that way. It'll tell you when it's not happy. That said though, I spoke about being a faster plane when you land. It is a little bit faster. You have to keep the speeds up, especially when you load her up in a turn, you know, like a base turn to final. It's very easy to get slow, or let me put it this way, it's unforgiving if you do get slow. Well, even though that buffeting will warn you, it's not a good idea to be totally loaded up that close to ground, because when she breaks quite hard, you know. This is personally a plane that I had better landings in than I had in my Commander. It's a bit more forgiving, actually. Not the wheels are not that big, but the gear has a lot of travel and it'll absorb a lot. Buy an Aerostar. They're great planes.